Today we're replacing the EGR valve on a Mustang.
EGR assembly is located right here, top left front of the engine, and it's held on by two bolts right here in the front and then right down there in the back. And then it's also held on by that big flare nut where the exhaust gas goes into the valve. Plus you've got a couple little hoses on it on the side, I think, oh, and the electrical connector on the front. The only tools we'll need to get it off are the 10mm socket with extension for the mounting bolts, and then a wrench big enough to get on the flare nut to take that off. And sometimes that fitting there can be really hard to get off, so we've saturated it with PB Blaster and let it sit for a while. I have no idea what actual size that is. If you have a big adjustable or crescent type wrench, that will work just fine to get in there, or a small pipe wrench can work too. So you have several options for that. We're going to take the top fitting off by pressing down on it and pulling it off like that. We're going to tuck that in down below, out of the way. That gives us more room to maneuver the wrench in there to take it off. So we get our adjustment on the wrench, grab it from the side, like so, make sure it's tight, and then lift up on it. And the main thing you want to do is when you're lifting up, if it starts to move, keep an eye on this big tube here and make sure that's not twisting. Because if that starts twisting, you'll break the tube off, and then you'll have to replace that whole tube assembly that goes down to the manifold. There's not a lot of room to put torque on that by hand, so if you can't get it off just by pushing up on it or getting a bite on it where you can tap on it with a hammer, I always use a cheater pipe. This one here is about a little over 3 feet long, slides over the end of the wrench, and then we lift up a little while keeping an eye on that pipe where it goes in to make sure it doesn't start to bend or flex. So there we go, that little extra, there we go. That little extra leverage, I should say it's actually a lot of extra leverage the pipe gives you, is just what it takes to make the difference on getting that to come loose. Keep working it off. It's still on there tight, so we're going to have to work it back and forth and carefully get it to come all the way off. But it's already broke loose. It's not going to be a problem now. If you start turning it and it feels like it's still getting really hard to move or it's binding up a little bit, make some back and forth motions like this. Go back down to where you've already loosened it or tightened it. Tighten it back up a little bit and then loosen it some more. If you keep doing that, it'll lubricate the threads and cut the rust and work it right off. And once you've got it loose, you can just pull the whole pipe back a little bit so it comes out and away from the opening. Alright, now we're going to get our 10mm socket and the ratchet handle and pull these two bolts out, and we'll be just about done. I've got a standard 3/8 inch ratchet drive here. I've also got this 3/8 inch combination 1/4 inch ratchet handle. But the nice thing about this one is you pull the part back there and it extends out another 8 inches. Gives you a lot more leverage and torque when you're trying to get something loose. Again, now this is just a 10mm head bolt, so you don't want to get too much torque on there because it will snap right off if you're not careful. And I think this one here, there's going to be very limited clearance between the end of the bolt and the oil filler there by removing the oil filler cap and setting it aside. That gives us more room right here to work our wrench into. Let's put it in place. Oh yeah, look at that. That gave me a lot more room. And there you go. It came loose, a little bit of extra torque on it, but it did come loose. And it's going to take a little while to unscrew it because of all the rust on the threads on the back. Keep an eye on it as you pull it away from the mounting plate because there's a gasket, we can see it down there, that we got to put back on. And I didn't want to spend a huge amount of money for this, so I went to the junkyard and I pulled one of these off of a same year model. It had been in a front end collision. I'm taking my chances on it that it will actually be a good one. Still need to very carefully remove the vacuum wires off of the old unit, which isn't too hard. We're just gonna get a hold of them, get a screwdriver behind them, and gently pry them back off a little bit at a time. We're going to start the bolts in the holes and place the gasket over them so we don't have to worry about it falling down and dropping off on one side. We're going to hold this in place, and they're going to slowly hand start both of these bolts into the bracket. Now that the two mounting bolts are back in place, we're going to put the vacuum line connector back on. Right there. Just going to wiggle it back and forth until it seats all the way down on there like that. And now we got to put the pickup tube back on. Remember, I told you it was a little bit off center. Down here you can see that gap there between the flare and the nut. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the wrench on there and just wiggle it around a little bit and try and get the cap back down where it needs to be. Now you can see that the end of the fitting is flush with the end of the flare. So we're going to very carefully lift the pipe up into place, set it so it's just started in there, and then again very gently start tightening the fitting to see if it goes in easily. If it doesn't go in easily, it's crying a cross thread, and we don't want that. So it has to go in super easy, almost hand tight, before you start putting a wrench on it. That worked out very well, just a couple little twists, and we've got it now so it's hand tight. And you can see it's actually starting to thread in like it's supposed to. So it's time to get the wrench back on there and finish it up. You don't want to over tighten these, because you don't want to crack the fitting or the flare. You just want to make sure it's tight so it's seated down nice and snug. And there's no specific torque for this. It's just a matter of getting it where it needs to be in order to not leak very much. And since it's a flare fitting, you don't want to use any pipe joint compound or thread tape on it. Those are not required or recommended at all. Now that that's tightened up and the bolts are in for the mounting, we can put our oil fill cap back in. Make sure it's tight. And then the electronic connector goes on right there. Push it in till you hear it click. And we are good to go. One valve totally replaced, albeit with an used part. We'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work out, we'll break down and buy a new one. That was only $10 for that one. I figure for $10 I'll take a chance on a used one. If it doesn't work, it's easy enough to change and put a new one on. Like I say, new ones are a lot of money, so I'm always like, well, let's take a chance on the used one first. Alright, so there you go. Changing that valve real quick in our yard. And the only tools we needed were a large adjustable wrench, a 10mm socket with an extension, and a piece of pipe or tubing to put on the wrench as we'll call it a cheater bar to help get more torque on it to get it drop down. So it wasn't too bad. You could do it yourself, save a bunch of money. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.